Network of vessels and organs. When we think of vessels, we usually think of blood vessels. These are different vessels. These do not carry blood. They carry a fluid that we call lymph. Sherry, where does that lymph come from? It comes from interstitial fluid. You are exactly correct. So this system consists of a network of vessels and organs that filter that fluid, the interstitial fluid, and the job is to return it back to the circulation. Here is what the lymphatic system in your body looks like. Lymphatic vessels follow blood vessels. So they're found in similar locations to your blood vessels. Sometimes they follow the arteries more, sometimes, mostly, they follow the veins more. The lymphatic vessels, they follow your blood vessels. Both, depends on where. We'll get into the specifics later on. When you see the lymphatic system portrayed in a book, they always show it in green. All right? Because they want you to know it's not red, arterial blood. It's not blue, venous blood. Except what location in the body switches red and blue? Pulmonary circulation is different. They want you to know that this isn't blood, so they draw it green. And it's representing lymphatic fluid. So this system is composed of a network of vessels and organs that filter the interstitial fluid, sometimes we refer to that as tissue fluid, and return it to the circulation. When we say returns it to the circulation, we mean what circulation at that point in time? We mean the blood specifically into the veins. Basically, the lymphatic system consists of three parts: a network of vessels, the fluid within it called the lymph, and the little organs associated with it, the primary ones that filter our lymph nodes. However, we will definitely talk about the other lymphatic organs as well. You have your tonsils, you have your spleen, you have the thymus gland, you have bone marrow, and you have this diffuse lymphatic tissue spread throughout the body in different areas. And we'll talk about that as we go through this. Because it's not filtering lymph, and it's not made mostly of reticular tissue like these organs are. Okay? And it has so many digestive functions. And it's right there receiving blood straight from the digestive tract. Good question, Reed. So I think we need to see a picture before we go any further. They have provided multiple pictures for us here, but I always like to draw this. If I draw this, what are we talking about? Very good. That's a capillary. Tell me about a capillary. It's a blood vessel that's made for exchange. It's the largest blood vessel, right? The biggest around. It's got the thickest wall. No, it's exactly the opposite. These are the smallest blood vessels. They have the thinnest wall. In fact, the wall's so thin, how many layers is it? One. Of what kind of cells? Squamous epithelial cells. So we say it's made of simple squamous epithelium, right? So capillaries allow this to happen. Oh, they also allow this to happen. And when the fluid is out here in the body, we're just going to put a few little body cells out here for fun. We call the space out here the interstitial space. So the fluid out here is called the interstitial fluid. Interstitial fluid and the interstitial space. Now that interstitial fluid is very similar to blood, except there's two things in the blood that are too big to basically get out, for the most part. Do you know what's in the blood that's too big to get out so it doesn't leak out here and go to the cells? What components of blood are too big to get out of the blood? Well, all of your blood cells. We don't want those leaving, right? And most proteins are too big to leak out. They stay in the blood. Well, we already know this. If our proteins leaked out of the blood, we would lose blood volume. So we may lose a few proteins, minor amounts of protein, but not most of it because proteins function as solutes. Solutes help to maintain blood volume. Remember we call those plasma proteins back in the previous chapter? So here we have it. I'm just recapping you about blood a little bit. Here's the blood flowing through the body. When it hits a capillary, exchange can occur with the tissues. Fluid comes out. It bathes the cells. Does some of that go into the cell? Sure, absolutely. Do cells do things with it? Maybe put wastes out? Sure, they do. And then some of that fluid eventually goes back. Really, most of it. But on average, they like to say that roughly 10% of the fluid will stay around the cell. As interstitial fluid. Well, let me ask you a question. What if this minute 10% stayed, and the next minute 10% more left and stayed, and then 10% more left and stayed, and 10% more left and stayed? What would happen out here? We would get so much fluid, we would swell up, right? So there must be a way to drain the fluid, the interstitial fluid, that stays around the cells. And that's where our lymphatic system comes in. So this is a type of lymphatic vessel. This right here is small as well, so this is actually a lymphatic capillary. And I'll draw this a little fancy. You'll see a picture that they drew in a second. These lymphatic capillaries, they have little fibrous cords, little connective tissue that anchors the lymphatic vessel, which is pretty neat. It anchors it to the tissues. And so as we get fluid out here, and as the fluid, the pressure builds up out here, look what it can do. As the fluid comes here, it just pushes this little flap open like that. And the fluid can move right in here. That's pretty cool. Once we're in here, we call the fluid lymph. It's no longer called interstitial fluid. It's now called lymph, or lymphatic fluid. Once it's in the, what kind of capillary is this? It's a lymphatic capillary. Right, a special capillary. Well, these little lymphatic capillaries, they're all over your body. Do you remember the picture we saw a while ago? That looked like, what's hiding from me? That looked like this? These are the large lymphatic vessels. The tiny ones, the capillaries are everywhere, and they're not even showing us the capillaries. These are just the big ones. Just like when we see blood vessels, we see the big blood vessels, right? We don't see the little capillaries. Little capillaries are all over. So wherever you had blood capillaries, you're going to have lymphatic capillaries to drain the tissue fluid as well. That's the way it works. So our fluid collects. In the lymphatic system, these lymphatic capillaries start to collect and form larger and larger and larger lymphatics. And eventually, they take this lymph and they put it back into what? They put it back into the blood. So let's go see a picture of that, because I don't want to dirty up this picture by putting a whole bunch of stuff on it. I like to make this one nice and neat and simple. So this is a lymphatic capillary and a little overview of the lymphatic system. So there, look, here we have body cells. Do you see that? This is just generalized tissue in the body. What are these vessels right here? The blue and red. Those are capillaries. Look, blood's coming in the arterial end. It spreads through the capillary, goes out over here, the venous end. And look how the lymphatic vessels, the little lymphatic capillaries are all around there too. What are they there to collect? Interstitial fluid. Good. Also called tissue fluid. Here, we see the little lymphatic capillary. Tell me two things that look different about this capillary, or maybe even three, compared to a normal capillary that we draw. Oh, right on. See, I didn't even say that yet, Reed. This one has an end. It looks like a finger, right? It's got a cap on the end. It's not open to another vessel. It's just sitting there and it's blind-ended right here. So there's no flow over here. This is the end of the capillary. Fluid can only go one way, back the other way. So this, whatever tissue's out here, it'll drain it and it'll take it a certain direction, won't it? Cool. We'll talk about how it goes a certain direction in a little bit. What else is special about this capillary compared to blood capillaries? Okay, the flaps. Look at these little mini flap valves right here. Because we have these anchors, it can push on the wall, and that wall forms a little flap valve that will open up and it will allow stuff to move in. So you're right. You both said it in different ways. It's how it exchanges. This isn't so leaky. This is made for material to come in, right? Not really to exchange. It's more made for material to come in. When the pressure is great out here in the tissues, it exerts pressure on the wall. It pushes whichever part's not anchored, it pushes it in and it lets fluid move in. Until what? Until the pressure in here is great enough to push back on that flap, and then no more will move in. It's really pretty cool. It is a one-way street. Very good, sir. I don't get real super fancy on the names of each of the groups of branches of lymphatic vessels. Just want you to understand the concept. They start small and they get larger. There's a nice little zoom up of what we've already seen. Very cool. Blind end capillaries. Now, why are lymphatic capillaries more permeable? And why can they take up larger things like cancer cells and debris and pathogens and even proteins if they happen to have proteins in the tissue? Because, right, blood capillaries can't, but what is it about them? It's those flaps. Those flaps are a lot larger than any fenestrations or pores in a capillary, so it lets larger material in. That's good and bad. It's one way that cancer cells spread. That's the main way cancer cells spread. Because those openings can get so large, cancer cells can get in there and they can spread through the body. Well, that's not cool. However, what is cool is any proteins that leak out of the blood, that accidentally get out of the blood, they can go in the lymphatic system and they can get returned to the blood. They just follow the pathway to get returned to the blood. This is kind of cool. You don't have lymphatic capillaries in your teeth. Interesting. You don't have them in the central nervous system. See, we have special fluid all around your central nervous system, don't we? Tell me what that fluid's called. Cerebrospinal fluid. So it will perform some of the functions, take up the excess. You don't have it in bones or bone marrow either. Now this next bullet there, I like to show you a picture. Now we're going to talk about some special lymphatic vessels. We've mentioned they're all over the body except for a few tissues like teeth and bone. It's really easy in your mind to link teeth and bone, right? And now because I said in your mind link teeth and bone, you can say, oh, my mind's working with my teeth and my bone. They don't have lymphatics in my mind, my brain, my teeth, my bones. You got it. Is that crazy, Reed? You don't have this. This is a new picture I put. You will have it after class when you download it again. This is your gut. Oh boy, we haven't covered this in lab yet. This is a couple labs from now. This is your digestive tract. This is your small intestine. See? It's a little tube. What do we call the opening of any tube? A lumen. Notice this lumen is ridged. Do you see that? Looks like a tire tread on the inside instead of the outside. And it goes around the wrong way or whatever, but, you know, just think of it like that. It's all grooved and ridged. Look, it's got these big folds that we see here. They have a name. We're not necessarily needing to learn these names yet because we'll learn that in the digestive system. But here's what we see. Upon those folds, upon those bigger folds, see these little teeny tiny ones right here? Okay? Those little teeny tiny folds are little finger-like projections. Invisible pretty much to your naked eye. You wouldn't really see them as clear as what we're seeing this. Well, kind of do. But go here. When we look at this, these little projections, which you don't need the name for yet, they're covered in cells. They're covered in epithelium. Can you tell me just from looking or from your memory from AMP1, the digestive tract from your stomach to your anus is lined by what kind of epithelium? Simple columnar epithelium. And it can have goblet cells. Look, there's some goblets right here. So here's the simple columnar. Notice it's surrounding this entire finger-like projection. Millions of those in your small intestine. Each of these little fingers that you see sticking up, it is called a villus. And this villus right here, its surface is even more highly folded. My goodness, you might remember microvilli from AMP1. When we get to digestive, we'll talk about it a little more. So let's think about this. We had that big tube that if we zoom in, look right here, this one thing right here, that is one villus right there. I zoom up on it, here it is. We cut it open and look, what do we see in here? What's red and blue? What kind of vessels? If they're teeny tiny and visible. Capillaries are in here. Why? If this is the digestive tract, why do we have capillaries in here? We like to use the word absorb, right? If it's the digestive tract, we've eaten our food, we've swallowed our food, it's gone to the stomach, it's got torn apart mechanically and with certain chemicals, it goes into the small intestine, the duodenum, it gets torn apart even more, and now we can eventually start to absorb it across the lining. That means that the nutrients that are out here, they get absorbed across these cells and into the blood right here, into your capillaries. The nutrients are now in your circulatory system. But there's one nutrient that's too big. Fat is too big to get into a regular capillary. All right? So fat is absorbed by the lymphatic system, these specialized vessels. They are called lacteals. You see them right here. I can't highlight it when I'm on this mode. Lacteals. They are specialized lymphatic capillaries present in your small intestinal lining. Really, they're in the mucosal portion under the epithelium. That's still the lining. Their job is to absorb fats because fats are too big to get into normal capillaries. So in the lymphatic fluid that's coursing through your digestive tract, can you imagine what it looks like if you just ate at McDonald's? Ooh. When that lymphatic fluid has a lot of fat in it in the digestive tract area, they give it a special name. Instead of just calling it lymph, they can call it chyle. C-H-Y-L-E. A little bit different than most guys with that name. Spell it. So let's look again. Here is the small intestine. Here is a specialized lymphatic vessel made for absorbing what nutrient? Fat. What do we call this vessel? No, it's got a special name. Lacteal. You got to own that. Lacteal. You know why? Because the fluid that travels through there is milky. It's oily. It's fatty. So it's thicker. It's milky. Lact gets you thinking about lactation. Makes you think milky. So that's why they call them lacteals, because they carry a milkier fluid, and we call that fluid chyle with a CH. Well, where does that fat go? It goes where all the other lymphatic vessels go, and it travels up through here, and it eventually goes back to your veins, specifically the subclavian veins. The subclavian veins is where all lymphatic fluid returns to the circulation. Through what veins? Subclavian veins. There are two major lymphatic ducts. The two largest lymphatic vessels are called ducts. So look at the picture here. The one on the right, boy, it's tough. The lymphatic duct on the right is called the right lymphatic duct. The one on the left is much bigger, much larger. Look here. Here it is. Travels all the way up in front of your spine there. It is called the thoracic duct. I think you can kind of tell. It's a little difficult. The shading is off. They used to make it more obvious. What side of the body is this? This is the right side of the body. What side of the body is this? The left. What part of the body is this down here? That's wide open. You could say that's the lower part of your body. That's the inferior portion of your body. Those are lower extremities, and this is your abdominal and pelvic region. Okay, I accept all of that right now. Here's the thing. You see this thoracic duct, how large it is? Notice, both the right and left leg, the abdominal stuff, it all goes into this thoracic duct. So all of the tissue fluid from your lower body, all of the interstitial fluid from your lower body, it goes through the thoracic duct on its way to the left subclavian. By the way, everything from the left side, look up there, of the upper body, also goes into the thoracic duct and finds its way into the left subclavian. So basically, 3/4 of your body, the entire left side, plus the lower right side, go through the thoracic duct. Okay? Only your upper quarter here on the right, your head on the right, your shoulder and arm on the right, your chest on the right, and the abdomen is, it's a little diffuse right here. This goes through the right lymphatic duct and into the right subclavian. So a very obvious question on a test would be for me to pick a body part and say, is the tissue fluid in this area filtered through the thoracic duct or the right lymphatic duct? What are the only areas that are filtered through the right lymphatic duct? Right upper quarter of your body. Right chest, right head, right shoulder, right arm. Everything else, thoracic duct. Because that's how we grow. That's why, here's why. This is bigger because it carries more fluid, right? The thoracic duct's bigger. And notice right here, the way that it happens is all these vessels from both legs, remember they're following the blood flow, so they're coming in, look how they're around the arteries right here in the abdominal region. They're around the common iliacs there. And they all go to right here to this big open structure called the cisterna chyli. That's at the bottom of the thoracic duct. So it's made to carry, to handle more fluid. And that's just how the body forms. There is much variation in people on where lymphatic vessels are, even more so than blood vessels. You may remember me talking to you guys about blood vessels, how, bodies can be freaky. You can have 2 aortas, abdominal aortas sometimes, or inferior vena cava, or all kinds of crazy blood vessels. Lymphatic can be even more odd. What are these little beans we see all around? Those are lymph nodes. You need to know that there are clusters of lymph nodes in certain areas represented in this picture. Major clusters would include the ones under the armpit area. What do we call those? Axillary. In the fold of the leg, right here, where the leg meets the body, what do we call that? Inguinal. You very commonly, check this out, have them in your joints. At your elbow, the axillary around your shoulder. You have them behind the knee as well. And here, that's pretty cool. Notice that there are chains in the neck as well. There's both superficial and deep cervical chains. This picture doesn't show them all. There's one in front of and behind your ear, pre- and post-auricular lymph nodes as well, which is pretty neat. And yep, you have occipital. And look here. We see them all throughout the abdomen as well. So lots of lymph nodes. What do these lymph nodes do? They filter the tissue fluid. They filter the tissue fluid or lymphatic fluid. If I'm asking you generically, you can say whatever you would like. If I get real fancy, I would like interstitial fluid. But I'm okay if you just define this, a network of vessels and organs that filters the tissue fluid and returns it to the circulation. I'm okay with that. I do need everybody to know the term interstitial fluid, though, because that becomes very important when you get into your program, nursing or what have you. See, lymphatic vessels are a lot like veins. They do have their own smooth muscle. The one way that they're different is their smooth muscle kind of rhythmically contracts, which is pretty cool. But they're like veins. Tell me what was special about veins. What did they have that arteries did not have? They had valves. They're under very low pressure, so is your lymphatic system, and they have valves. So watch this. Here is a lymphatic vessel, right here. Right here is where the valve starts. Can you see it? It's a little thicker here, and really, well, realistically, that's not true. Really, it starts right about here. And it comes in there. And on this side, the valve's right through here, and it comes in right here. And these two cusps are meeting right here. So if fluid is coursing through this lymphatic vessel, it would go this way, the opposite of my arrow, the direction my arrow is moving. And when it got right here, it would push the valve open, and it would continue down through the bottom. Lymphatic vessels have valves. These valves are one-way valves, just like your semilunar valves in your heart, and the valves in the veins, which are semilunar. That means there's no cords attached to them, right? Well, they don't have anywhere to anchor anyway. They're just spanned across this vessel. And they direct flow one way. In this vessel, you could see the flow would be moving down, correct? Depending upon where you are in class, you may or may not know some things about veins. You're about to learn something about veins and lymphatic flow that makes them similar. I'm going to start by saying this. What allows blood, what's the primary force that allows blood to move through your blood vessels? Your heart, right? The number one force that allows blood to move through your body is the pressure created by the heart. The heart is a pump for a reason. The heart is made of muscle for a reason. It squeezes its chamber and shoots blood out, correct? What chamber shoots blood into the aorta? Which ventricle? The left ventricle. So the left ventricle is the thickest, correct? So the primary thing that moves blood through your body is the heart. Now, arteries expand and recoil and snap back, and that helps the flow, so the heart's not doing all the work. When blood gets to your veins have valves, and the concept is this. Anything that squeezes a blood vessel, that squeezes a vein, helps fluid flow through a vein. Here's a vein. There's just little valves. If I squeeze this vein right here, what's the blood going to do in there? That blood is going to get pushed. Does everybody agree? If the blood tries to go this way, what would it do to these flaps? It would close them up just like that. If the blood tries to go this way, what would it do? It would open them. So our concept is anything that squeezes a vein tends to move blood along. in the proper direction. Anything that squeezes a vein moves blood through the vein. It helps to move blood through the vein. Well, that's as long as you squeeze it and then you let go of it, correct? I mean, if you just squeezed it and held it, that wouldn't be very good for pumping. That would push some and then you close it off. So we don't want that. Hey, what kind of things in the body naturally squeeze veins? The number one is muscle contraction. Have you ever heard that moving exercise is good for your heart? You ever heard that exercise is good for your circulation? Exercise, when you're exercising, your muscles are contracting and relaxing and contracting and relaxing, and they are squeezing your veins. And that is helping to push blood back to your heart, to return flow to the heart. That's cool. Have you ever heard that movement is healthy and good for your immune system? Whenever you move, you're not only squeezing fluid through the veins, you're also squeezing fluid through the lymphatic system. Movement pushes fluid through the lymphatic system as well. So we have muscle contractions. Those are primary squeezers. This is cool. Arteries pulse. We know why. The pressure gets large when the ventricle contracts. It bulges it out. It snaps back, elastic recoil. When it bulges out, when your pulse is coursing through an artery, arteries and veins, the artery touches the vein, it squeezes in on the vein and pushes fluid through the vein. Some lymphatic vessels are on top of arteries or underneath arteries as well, and when the pulse goes through the artery, it squeezes on the lymphatic system. So you notice what I'm doing here. I'm doing two things at once. I'm doing fluid flow through the veins and fluid flow through the lymphatic system at the same time. Why? Because they are the same. Because they're both low pressure. Because they both have valves. And anything that squeezes either of them will push fluid through them in the proper direction, as long as your valves are intact. Miriam, what would you say the next one is? Breathing. See, when you breathe, you pressurize your thoracic cavity, and when your diaphragm moves down, it pressurizes your abdominal cavity. So you breathe in and out, and you're rhythmically compressing the tissues in the abdominal and thoracic cavities. Whatever veins are in there get squeezed, whatever lymphatics are in there get squeezed. So breathing creates pressure on vessels that squeezes them. That's pretty cool. Those are the major ones. Muscle contractions from movement, arterial pulsations, and breathing. Now, in the lymphatic system, we need to add smooth muscle contractions. Lymphatic vessels rhythmically contract. They have rhythmic contractions. Our veins aren't doing that, but our lymphatic system does. Smooth muscle, rhythmic, smooth muscle contractions. And all of this works because of what simple structures? Correct. Valves. Without valves, none of that would work properly because the flow wouldn't be one way. Lymphatic system, network of vessels and organs. What are the primary organs? No, main ones. Just the main one. The filtering one. Lymph nodes. Lymph nodes. Those are the main ones, right? And vessels. Cool. That filters the fluid. The lymph nodes are the filters, and the vessels return it to the circulation. They return it where? Subclavian what? Veins. So who can tell me why it's returned to the veins and not the arteries? Here's a reason. Arterial end. venous end. Tell me about the blood pressure in an artery. 120/80. Tell me about the pressure in a vein. This is venous. I'll make it say vein. It's less. It's usually less than 10 millimeters of mercury. Wow. The large vessels near the heart, really as fluid returns to the heart, right there it's about 0. So in the subclavians it's really low. It's way less than 10. Pressure in an artery of 120. I don't know, but I think you've probably watched a movie before. I think you've probably seen a movie where somebody's throat got cut. And when they cut somebody's artery in their throat, what does the blood do? Squirts out. Why? Because your heart's pumping. It's pumping with a ton of pressure. It shoots it out. Now, veins have very low pressure. It's just barely flowing through there because of squeezing of things like we mentioned. So let's picture this. We have a lymphatic vessel, and it needs to either attach to a vein or an artery because its whole job is to return fluid to what? To the blood. So here's my lymph. It wants to get to the blood. It's got a choice. It can attach to an artery or it can attach to a vein. Lymphatics have low pressure. If a lymphatic attached to an artery, look, let's pretend that this right here is a little attachment. And our pressure here is low. What's going to happen as soon as it opens up into the artery is instead of what we want to happen, blood would go in here and blood would fill up that lymphatic system. Because everything moves from high to low, high pressure to low pressure, absolutely right. So the lymphatic vessels have no choice. Lymphatic vessels must join veins. And when they join a vein, even though a lymphatic vessel is low pressure, the veins are lower pressure. So the fluid can leave the lymphatic system and go right into the vein, and it is now returned to the circulation. Why? It's all about pressure, going from high to low. Lymphatic system is not its own system. It is actually part of what larger system? The immune system. When we talk about the lymphatic system in here, we're really talking about the structural components of the immune system. Because when we do the immune system, really the immune system is different than most other systems. It's spread all over the body. It's got parts in all different kinds of tissues. So one of the main structural parts of the immune system we call the lymphatic system. The real huge cells of the immune system are blood cells, though. Which kind of blood cells? White blood cells. So let's not forget that. When we're doing the lymphatic system, we're really doing lymphatic and immune. We kind of separate them according to function. But this chapter, lymphatic, goes right with the immune chapter. These concepts are all the same. Therefore, when we are talking about the cells of the lymphatic system, we're really talking mainly about white blood cells, lymphocytes, and macrophages. Lymphocytes and macrophages. We have seen lymphocytes under a slide. We know they have a big, huge, large nucleus. What we may not be aware of yet is there's a couple of different types. There's another type that we'll get more specific on when we get to the immune system itself. But the two generalized lymphocytes are called T cells and B cells, or T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes. They look the same. If we saw them, we couldn't tell the difference. The difference is in what they do. Frankly, I don't want to go through all the differences with you right now because we're going to do that in chapter 21. We'll talk about the difference between T cells and B cells. It will mention it on the slides here. We don't need to try to learn it yet. Once we learn it for chapter 21, we'll own it for chapter 20. We also have macrophages. Now this is what the generalized lymphatic tissue would look like. In AMP1, when we do histology, this is one tissue that we don't actually see. When we do connective tissue, we talk about dense regular. You may remember that. Dense irregular in the skin, collagen fibers going all different kinds of directions. We did some elastic fibers in loose areolar connective tissue, also some elastic fibers in certain cartilage that's found in the ear, elastic cartilage, you may remember that. Reticular tissue is the tissue of the lymphatic organs. You'll find this in the bone marrow, the spleen, find it in the tonsil, you'll find it in the lymph node. It, as you see here, it is a loose type of connective tissue. See all the spaces there? That should help you to see that. Look, I have composed a slide that has this on there, so you'll be able to get it later right after the picture. Reticular connective tissue is a type of loose connective tissue. Here's the deal. These fibers are smaller than collagen. Some people consider them fine collagen fibers, in fact. But these are thinner fibers that are very similar to collagen, just smaller. It's called reticular fibers. Okay, what's the purpose? Our lymphatic system is there to filter tissue fluid, correct? So we will have this reticular tissue here, and white blood cells will attach to it. And they will wait for the tissue fluid to be filtered through here. Let's say this happens to be, if this was a lymph node, material would come through there, and the white blood cells would be located there so that they could detoxify it. Maybe if there were phagocytes, they could eat it up. Maybe they could release some antibodies. They could do whatever they need to do. So the concept is reticular connective tissue has lots of spaces so that the immune system cells can migrate through there and do what they need to do. What are the major kind of cells that we're talking about when we say white blood cells? Lymphocytes and macrophages. The macrophages they will actually eat, they will physically eat some cellular debris or microorganisms. Now, they don't just eat, they also release chemicals that help to neutralize, like antibodies. And your T cells can perform their functions as well. They're doing kind of immune surveillance there, getting introduced to stuff. Oh yeah, our only exception, the thymus is the only lymphatic organ that's not made of reticular connective tissue. The thymus is different. We'll talk about it in a little bit. Okay, lymph nodes. Lymph nodes look like that. You can listen to the lab integrity to learn all the parts of a lymph node. Okay? What I will say here, though, is this. Lymph nodes have more vessels leading in. We call those afferent lymphatics. Talked about it in lab. Than they have vessels leading out. The purpose of this is to allow the fluid to come in this side of the lymph node through its vessels, to build up in the lymph node and to get circulated through the lymph node, pushed through the different various compartments, because it's kind of compartmentalized by the parts of the capsule that penetrate in that we call trabeculi. So the more places that this fluid flows, the more it gets filtered, so to speak, filtered by the white blood cells, by either the T cells or the B cells or the macrophages or really all of them. Any filter that filters with white blood cells, we could call a biological filter, and you'll see that in the slide in a little bit. Concept, once again, multiple vessels leading in. It can't just stream straight across. It kind of circulates through, fewer vessels leading out, so it kind of backs up in here, which allows for the filtering to occur, allows the white blood cells to have time to act upon that material. And then the fluid continues on, and it may go to another lymph node. It may go a little further along the chain, get filtered again, eventually return back to the blood where? Subclavian veins. Commonly, in the germinal center of those lymph nodes, that is where the B lymphocytes reside, in the germinal center. We remember that this is the medullary region down here. The sinuses are open spaces there. That's where the macrophages hang out. They hang out in the open spaces, and they phagocytize material. The T cells love to hang out in these deeper areas of the cortex down here. So we kind of have B cells in their germinal centers, T cells through the deep part of the cortex, and macrophages in the sinuses. Now, B cells and T cells also get into the medulla, but they're on the cords, and I don't usually separate the difference between the cords and the sinuses. So commonly what we do is we talk about the medullary region having macrophages, and we generically say that throughout the cortex we have, in this deeper part, we have the T cells, and out here in the germinal centers we have B cells. So here's our other picture from our book. Here are what our actual slides on campus look like. It looks a little better on a computer, but frankly, these aren't the greatest slides in the world. Here we see the capsule around the lymph node. We see the subcapsular sinus, the space here. Here we see a lymphatic follicle. We actually don't see a germinal center, even though it would be in here. And what do we call the capsule parts that penetrate down here? We call that trabeculi. Here's zoomed up just on the subcapsular sinus. Oh, cool. Lymphocytes. Lots of lymphocytes here, and other cells as well. Spleen. Okay, the spleen is different from the lymph node because the spleen does not filter lymph. Its job is to filter blood. So the spleen has blood going in and blood going out. It has arteries leading into it, a splenic artery and a splenic vein leading out of it. You can see that in the picture. Within the spleen, you may remember that two major kinds of tissue are called white pulp and red pulp. The white pulp surrounds arteries that they like to call central arteries. There are sinuses throughout as well. Commonly, the white pulp consists of lymphocytes, and the red pulp is close to the sinuses, and that's where more of the macrophages love to hang out. Macrophages love to hang out in the red pulp. And the spleen is made to destroy red blood cells. It is the main site in the body of red blood cell destruction because it has macrophages that break down those red blood cells, help play a role in processing the different parts. Yep, lots of dead red blood cells in the red pulp. Remember, on the slide in our class, we will see the white pulp actually looks dark on the slide because the lymphocytes are so dense. The red pulp appears a little more pale because there's more space out there. And right here, hard to focus on, but that hole right there is the lumen of a blood vessel called a central artery. If it's really small, we could call it a central arteriole. That's a blood vessel. So when we see this, we would say, here's red pulp, here's white pulp, and here's a central artery. What is this out here? That is a capsule. If it penetrated inward, we would say trabeculi. Here are the slides, once again, that mention the functions. Filters blood, we already talked about that. Helps to process the old red blood cells, destroy red blood cells. It's a location where lymphocytes can multiply. When we talk about the immune system, we'll talk about surveillance and what T cells do and what B cells do. And in the spleen, they're playing a role in the immune system. Platelets can be stored in the spleen. In a little bitty growing, developing baby that we might call a fetus, red blood cells are formed in the spleen. That doesn't happen after we are born, but before birth it does. And the spleen can also function as a blood reservoir. It can store blood. Can you live without a spleen? Yes, because if you lose your spleen, other organs just take over the functions, which is pretty cool. The thymus gland. We did not see a lab slide. So picture's not super important for us because we're not going to see a picture of it in lab. The thymus gland is located where? In your throat? No, in your thoracic cavity, under your sternum, towards the top of the heart and in between some of the major blood vessels there. Your thymus gland is the largest when you're young. So it's small when you're a kid, and as you become a teenager, it's growing, and then it shifts. At some point in your teen years, it quits growing, and it actually starts to go backwards and to degenerate, and a lot of it gets replaced by connective tissue. So we say that the thymus gland is the largest in childhood, and it actually atrophies, that's our word for shrinks, in adulthood. What is the space between the lungs called? Mediastinum. That's where your thymus is. Mediastinum. Remember, the thymus is not reticular connective tissue. It is different. The thymus also is where T cells mature. Or we'll use a fancy word in a little bit, where they become immunocompetent, where they learn how to play a role in your immune system. The reason that T cells or T lymphocytes are called T cells is because they do this in the thymus. The thymus is all about T cells. That will become important when we talk about the immune system and the difference between T cells and B cells. The thymus also has epithelial tissue, and so, as we know, epithelial tissue, cuboidal epithelium, can commonly function as a gland, and the thymus actually makes hormones that we learned about in the endocrine system that help play a role in the development of the T cells and the immune system. So, because of its endocrine tissue that does that, the thymus actually makes some hormones. In addition to being immune, we could also discuss it with the endocrine system. Here is a tonsil. You have three groups of tonsils. Pharyngeal. Those are actually up in the back of the throat behind the nose. They are commonly referred to as adenoids. You have your main tonsils on the side of your throat at the back of your mouth called the palatine tonsils. And then at the base of the tongue, that's where the tongue attaches in the throat, you have some tonsils called lingual tonsils. Tonsils are special because, unlike lymph nodes, they have no afferent vessels leading into them. You'll remember this was discussed in the lab. The tonsils are in your throat somewhere, and what happens is the material that passes over them comes down into these spaces and gets into these crevices called crypts, and then the tonsil pulls it in and uses its lymphatic tissue, its lymphocytes and macrophages to neutralize that material, whatever it might be. The tonsils definitely have follicles. We barely see them in this picture. They're so tiny. Here's one, a big one, with a little portion of a crypt right here, and then zoomed up on a follicle of a tonsil. Tonsils are unique because their capsule is not connective like most capsules. What is their capsule? Very good. It's the same kind of epithelium that's found in the mouth. In fact, it's called stratified squamous epithelium. And look, you can see that right here. If we could zoom up on that. See the basement membrane, kind of look at saying multiple cells there. It's tough to tell really, but that's stratified squamous epithelium. Can you live without your tonsils? Yes. What's the main reason they take tonsils out nowadays? Sleep apnea, difficulty breathing at night. Tonsils are so big in some people who aren't here tonight that they have them removed because it makes them snore. Strep throat used to be the main reason. Recurrent tonsillitis from strep throat back in the day, but that's secondary to the other now. So you can have your tonsils out without getting a lot of tonsillitis and sore throats. We're not actually going to look at bone marrow in here, but remember bone marrow is considered lymphatic. What we are going to look at are these clusters of follicles. See, throughout the digestive tract and in other tissues as well, we're going to have clusters of lymphatic tissue. In the digestive tract, in certain areas, they call these Peyer's patches. They're just little lymphatic follicles or lymphoid follicles that are found within the lining of certain areas, like the digestive tract, like the respiratory tract. Collectively, they refer to this tissue, because it's in the mucosal lining, as mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue, MALT. They used to separate it out and call it GALT, gut-associated lymphoid tissue. And they're like, well, it's in the respiratory tract too. That's very similar. Let's just lump them all together and call it mucosa instead of gut. Look, here's a picture. There's your lymphatic nodules. They look like the follicles that we've seen before. They have little germinal centers, T cells and B cells. It's pretty cool. Specifically, in the ileum of the small intestine, we call these clusters Peyer's patches in the ileum of the small intestine. We call them Peyer's patches. And your appendix is also a lymphatic organ. Even though we'll talk about it with the digestive tract, we'll talk about the small intestine with the digestive tract. It also has lymphatic tissue there. Remember, lymphatic tissue is working with the immune system. T cells and B cells and macrophages. Really cool thing about the appendix, and I'll probably say this in digestive, but I'll say it now so you'll hear it. They have discovered that the appendix is one of the main locations in your body that makes your healthy, good bacteria. Your bacterial flora that's good for you is a function of the appendix that they did not know until the last few years. So it is important. And this is one of the shortest chapters in the book, the lymphatic system, and we are now finished with it.